Tommy Jaggi of Fansided here with NFL expert Marcus Mosher. We're going to talk about the biggest news around the NFL this week, Marcus. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't start off with the Aaron Rodgers news. We knew this was coming, I think, for quite some time now. It looked maybe a little less likely just when it didn't happen by the draft and, Rodgers at OTAs. It's like, all right, is this happening still? Maybe 80% chance now. It's official. Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers for the 2025 season. I'm a Steelers fan. And so, Marcus, you know that I've got mixed feelings about this.
Well, you go first. You tell me those mixed feelings, because you are our resident Steeler fan.
All right,
here.
Well, this is the debacle here, Marcus. And I know that you and I have talked about this off camera before, but the Steelers are stuck in a place where I think most fans would agree they don't want to be here anymore. And I think there's a lot of teams that would sign up for the 9, 10, 11 win season every year. That just isn't enough for this team anymore. They have 3 playoff wins over the last 14 years. Those came against quarterbacks Alex Smith, Matt Moore, and AJ McCarron, Marcus. And now they're on an 8-year drought without a playoff win. So from their mind, I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to exit this mode of desperation and snap that streak so that they don't go a decade-long drought without a playoff win. I think that'd be a really bad stamp on Mike Tomlin's career. At the same time, it's like Aaron Rodgers is a 41-year-old quarterback. He led the New York Jets to a 4-13 record last year, albeit with a lot of moving parts, coaches firing, all that kind of stuff. But is it enough to push the needle forward? Absolutely, it's a better choice than Mason Rudolph, who the Steelers had there prior, who was projected to be the starter. Maybe the Steelers would have went out and signed Kirk Cousins or something else. But Marcus, I'm afraid that this move for Aaron Rodgers comes 3 to 4 years too late, where it's like, now you are going to be in quarterback purgatory again. Maybe Rodgers ends up being the 20th to 26th best quarterback in the NFL. And that's what the range that you're probably hoping he lands in at least. Is this enough to get it done? And I have a feeling that this is going to end in disappointment once again with either an early exit from the playoffs or maybe just narrowly missing that. I have a feeling it's going to come down to another week 18 where the Steelers need some things to happen just for it to go their way.
I mean, obviously we have a lot of thoughts here, but let's start with this. I heard a lot of Steeler fans over the weekend said, hey, this is the best option that was available. And
sure,
I think that's partially true, right? Like, it's true that he was the best option here in June. Now, can you make an argument that he was the best option in March? Maybe they would have been better off going with, a younger quarterback, bringing back Justin Fields, drafting somebody, whoever. But yes, that's the best option now. But I think the Steeler fans that have maybe a more long-term view of this franchise understand that this didn't have to be the choice this year. You should have been making moves years ago so that you didn't get into this quarterback purgatory situation where you're having to sign guys like Russell Wilson, who the Broncos were paying $85 million not to be there. You're trading for Justin Fields, who the Bears clearly wanted to move on from, even though they didn't have a franchise quarterback. I think this is the best they could do at this point. But the fact that they're at this point, I think, says a lot about where they're at as a franchise right now.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Of the remaining options, Aaron Rodgers, by far the best choice if you are looking to snap the playoff drought this year. I just don't know what he's going to offer you beyond that. And I think that that's where it gets scary, because we're talking about a guy that turns 42 years old in December, who did not lead his previous team to success, albeit you can say he's recovering from the Achilles, whatever, still had a full year last year, didn't get it done. Statistical production is fine. It's just more of the game manager type than what we've seen in years past. We know that the mobility isn't there, what it used to be. But Marcus, it's like, this is where Steelers fans are right now. This is the 5th straight season the Steelers will have a new starting quarterback to begin the year. And they need to get out of this mode that they're in right now of just saying, let's get a stopgap guy. Stopgap. Kenny Pickett didn't work. We both knew he was terrible during the pre-draft process. It was an awful quarterback class. They should have never done that. Yeah. But now it's time to look ahead. 2026 draft. And I think if this comes down to a situation where it's like Steelers exit the playoffs in round 1, get spanked in the wild card round again, and now you're picking 21st, 22nd, when you could have been picking 12th, I think that that's where the holdup is for some Steelers fans here that are like, we need to move up and get a quarterback and finally fix this issue next year.
Can I break some news to you, Tommy, that the
Go
Steelers
for
will
it.
have a new starting quarterback in 2026. So it'll be 6 years in a row that they have a new starting quarterback. And I actually think Steeler
100%.
fans are happy about that. I did want to talk about the injury a little bit because I am of the belief that Rodgers looked healthier as the season went on
Mhm.
last year, right? Like he's just further removed from the torn Achilles. And I do see a lot of Steeler fans saying, hey, 2 years removed, he's going to be much healthier. The problem is that age 41 quarterbacks, and he'll be 42 in December. Those guys just don't stay healthy. Like they're always going to be banged up. And we saw Rodgers last year. He hurt his ankle halfway through the season. Those quarterbacks have a hard time staying healthy throughout the course of the year. So while he might be healthy now, that's one of the knocks when you're signing these older quarterbacks is they don't stay on the field. So I understand the optimism that way, but let's see what it looks like November, December once he's beat up a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. And Marcus, for what it's worth, the line changed half a point in week 1 against the Jets, but I think that's because odds makers already knew that Rodgers was going to be the quarterback, right?
Yeah, they already knew. Just a couple things on Aaron Rodgers, where he's at in his career. I actually watched some of the tape from the second half of last year. He still has a really good arm. When he's protected in the pocket, man, he can make some unbelievable throws down the sideline. He can rip it down the seam if he needs to. I think where you've seen the biggest regression in his game is the mobility. Now, he's never been Lamar Jackson or anything like that. But if you remember like the MVP days of Aaron Rodgers, he's somebody who could get outside the pocket and make some unbelievable throws on the run. He's just not doing that anymore. He's kind of a sitting duck in the pocket. And that's a problem when teams get pressure because he just can't avoid pressure anymore. He's way more likely just to dump the ball off or take a sack. And that's where for the Steelers with this young offensive line, how quickly they grow up and how they develop and if they can stay healthy will likely determine how successful Rodgers is this year in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it makes sense. Older quarterbacks, typically that happens with them. We saw this with Ben Roethlisberger, the last final years of his career. If he doesn't have that ability, that takes away part of the game that made him so great early in his career, the play extension, the throwing on the run. And he really didn't showcase that with the Jets last year. So the Steelers might get a limited version of the player that they are expecting. But yeah.
Can I ask you one question, Tommy, real quick,
Sure, go
before
for
we
it.
move on? It by all accounts, it seems like this was a Mike Tomlin move to get Aaron Rodgers. I mean, seems like the front office wanted to bring back Justin Fields. Even Art Rooney said in his like post season availability that he wanted to bring back one of the two quarterbacks from last year. That obviously didn't happen. We know Tomlin has a problem when it comes to players that he loved in the past. I think you and I always talk about the William Jackson example of a guy that was completely done, but Tomlin brought him in anyways. If this doesn't work out for Mike Tomlin, let's say they go 8-9 or 9-8, or Rodgers can't stay healthy and they have to turn to Rudolph, could this be the move that ultimately maybe spells doom for Mike Tomlin? I know everybody says that he's untouchable from a firing standpoint, but if this goes poorly, could we see Pittsburgh potentially move on next offseason?
I think you could see them on the cusp of that. And what I mean is I don't think that they will terminate Tomlin's contract. They just gave him a 3-year extension last offseason. But I think this could be the turning point where the front office and the owner, Art Rooney too, get together and say, this might be the turning point right here. If this season goes south, if the Steelers have a 7 or 8 win season, after getting Aaron Rodgers and after maybe going against what some of the heads in the front office wanted to do, I don't think that's going to be a good mark on his career at all. And like you said, I mean, Tomlin has been known for bringing in people that he's had that he's really liked during like the pre-draft process, guys that have beat him up. Like, give you an example. The Steelers got annihilated by the Vikings a few years back. It's 2021, I think, is Roethlisberger's last season. They went and signed Mason Cole after that because they watched Mason Cole have a good game against them, even though he was not a good football player.
Yeah.
They did this with Miles Jack. They did this with Patrick Peterson, although Peterson obviously had a terrific NFL career. He wasn't the same player at that point.
Nope.
They're doing it with Darius Slay. They signed a 34-year-old Darius Slay this offseason. Steelers got smashed by
Patrick
the Eagles
Queen.
last year.
Patrick Queen was
Patrick
one of their
Queen.
biggest free agent
So,
signings ever because he had some good games against
Tomlin has
Pittsburgh.
yeah, you're right. Tomlin has a fatal flaw with this recency bias where he sees a player have a good game against him that sticks in his mind. And Rodgers is a terrific player in terms of his career. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But this is not the version of Rodgers that you should be selling the farm for right now. And that's the issue that I have with. Going back to it, Marcus, I do think he was the best available option. I think that he's still a tier above what you'd be getting out of Kirk Cousins at this point. I just don't trust Cousins' arm talent. I know he had the injuries late in the season. I know that factors into how he was able to step into his throws with the shoulder and all that. But Rodgers just has more left in the tank in terms of the velocity, the zip, that kind of stuff. And he had a lot more to begin with. So if they were to go one of those two routes, Rodgers is the guy.
Yeah, I mean, again, it makes sense. I think the problem is that when you're tying yourself down to options like Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers, you're kind of doomed from the start. And again, I know this was not a great quarterback class, but they've had plenty of opportunities in the past. And that's how you end up in this situation. But Tommy, I did want to talk about the wide receiver too, because if this is going to work, I think the Steelers need to have a situation like Tom Brady had in Tampa Bay, where you're just so loaded with weapons and talent around Rodgers that he doesn't feel like he has to do too much. Let him play point guard and let him get the ball out of his hands quickly. You remember one of the reasons why Tom Brady went to Tampa is because he was going to play with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. He brought Rob Gronkowski with him. And then, they went and signed Antonio Brown. So they were loaded at receiver. I don't see this situation working out if it's DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin. Like, they clearly need another option. And it sounds like they've been trying to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes the George Pickens trade that much more baffling. Now, I understand why they had to do it. I've written about it multiple times, why Pickens couldn't be on the roster this year. Things went really south in the locker room. The guy showing up at game time, not going through the walkthroughs. Like, you can't have a player like that on your team when you've got a 35-year-old Cam Hayward at the time kicking his butt, TJ Watt there kicking his butt, making sure that you're ready to go. You can't have one of your best offensive players pick and choose when he wants to play football. And we've seen that on the field. You watched all 22 films. So I understand why Pickens had to go. But in retrospect now, it's like, you were signing a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. The window is now. You have to win right now this season, or it could all come crashing down. And you can't do that without a wide receiver too. And that's the issue that we have right now. Roman Wilson is such a wild card. I think you're hoping to get maybe a high-end wide receiver 3 out of him. I think it's unreasonable, especially this year after playing 5 snaps as a rookie, to expect Roman Wilson to be wide receiver 2 caliber for Rodgers this year. And so you have to ask, what's next for the Steelers? Are they going to trade for somebody? I would suspect them to make a trade, Marcus, by training camp. And it looks like tight end is not out of the question. Like, it seems like they're just looking for a skill player, a receiving threat, not necessarily a wide receiver. They've talked about Jonnu Smith. They've talked about Kyle Pitts.
We'll get to those guys. Yeah.
Yes. So there are guys on their radar that they are looking at. And I understand why at this point, it's like, if Rodgers is the guy you're going with, you need to make sure that he's got every weapon at his disposal. And right now they just do not.
Yeah, and think about the weapons that Rodgers has had, let's say for like the last decade or so. Garrett Wilson last year, someone who was unbelievably quick and a fantastic route runner. Devontae Adams, maybe the best route runner in football over the last decade. Randall Cobb, who was playing in the slot, who was a really good slot receiver, making plays after the catch. DK Metcalf is an unbelievably good player. Like, I think he's going to be excellent as an X receiver. He's that downfield weapon that they needed once they knew they were going to trade Pickens away. So he's going to be fine. I just wonder, Tommy, and I think this is what the Steelers are trying to figure out as well. Who's the guy on 3rd and 6 they feel comfortable running a slant and getting open, creating separation? Who's the guy that can run the out route on a goal line situation that they know is going to be able to create separation? I don't think that guy is on the roster right now, and I think that's why they're trying to explore every trade that's out there. We've heard Chris Olave. Now, that kind of got shot down over the last month. We heard maybe one of the Packers receivers since they drafted Matthew Golden and Savion Williams. I fully expect Pittsburgh to go out and try to acquire a number 2 receiver. It's just going to be hard here in June and July because most teams aren't getting rid of their receivers. Maybe one of the solutions is you get through training camp, you get through the first month of the season, and then you see what's available. But again, we like Roman Wilson. We like Calvin Austin. I don't think those guys are ready to be number 2 receivers for Aaron Rodgers, who requires guys to be in the right spot, be precise route runners, see things the way that he sees things. We even saw that with Mike Williams last year. Remember when Aaron Rodgers and Mike Williams got into a big kind of fight because they didn't see a play the same way? They're going to need a veteran in here. I'm just not sure who that is yet.
Marcus, that might be the biggest question that nobody is talking about right now. And by the way, Jordy Nelson, you talk about one of the best connections from quarterback to wide receiver. The chemistry with Rodgers and Nelson was impeccable. And then it went right from Nelson to Davante Adams. And so Rodgers, during all of his best seasons in the NFL, he's had a receiver that's been 100% like on the same page with him in terms of he can throw that outbreaking route. He knows exactly where his receiver is going to be. And like you mentioned, that's really not DK Metcalf's game. No. He's more of the down the field, body you up type of wide receiver. He's not the pinpoint precise route runner that Rodgers has always had his success with. And so Marcus, in hindsight, and I just wrote about this, I dropped it on Still Curtain yesterday morning. The Steelers, if they knew that Rodgers was the plan all along, they should have signed Davante Adams in free agency because the chemistry is already there. Adams had about 900 yards and 8 touchdowns in 11 games with the Jets last season. The Jets were bad, but the chemistry, the connection is still there. They could have saved money and they could have saved a second-round pick had they just signed Adams in free agency rather than trading for DK Metcalf, who now we have to start this chemistry all over. I know these guys have been working out together this summer. That's only going to get you so far. You got to see what happens when you're on the field in a game time situation. But I have the same questions that you do there. I think they need more of the Garrett Wilson type receiver. They need more of the guy who can run the routes and be in the exact spot that they need to be in, where Rodgers needs them to be in to have the trust and confidence in them. With Metcalf being your only guy, he's going to be the guy that gets all the attention anyway.
Yeah, and I think the problem with Davante Adams is Adams didn't know for sure where Rodgers was going to land, right? I think back in March, Pittsburgh was hoping to bring back Justin Fields. Like that's been reported for a while now that was the hope that they would bring him back. I think the other thing with Davante Adams is he's always wanted to play on the West Coast. That's why he wanted to get traded to the Raiders. He even narrowed it down to the 49ers and the Rams this year in free agency. So I just don't know how likely it would have been to sign Davante Adams playing in Pittsburgh. But you're not wrong. Like once they knew that Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins for that matter were potential targets, they needed to go out and address the wide receiver position. There was a report that came out today, I believe from Albert Breer, where Pittsburgh offered Chris Godwin $30 million a year in free agency. He's decided to stay in Tampa Bay instead. Pittsburgh has been trying. It's not like Omar Khan and the Steelers haven't been working to try to get deals done. They tried to get Brandon Ayuk last offseason. That obviously didn't work. They finally landed DK Metcalf. I think one of the problems that Pittsburgh is going to run into here, when you're paying DK Metcalf around $30 million a year, are you going to be willing to spend, let's say, another 20, 25 million to go out and get someone like DJ Moore who might be available? I don't know. I just don't know if Pittsburgh is going to be able to stomach the idea of paying $55 million a year for 2 receivers.
I get that. And I don't think they will either, just based on their history. This has always been the team where you spend money on defense, you spend some draft picks on offense, sometimes you recycle, replace, and you pay one receiver at a time. And so this would break all historic Steelers trends as we've seen, because even back in like the Hines Ward days, they were paying one receiver, Plexico goes, and then they pay Antonio Brown after Hines Ward, and they cycle through. They let Emmanuel Sanders go. They let Mike Wallace go. Like, this is something that would be completely uncharted territory for them if they're willing to drop $55-60 million a year in one position on offense. And I can't see them doing that. I think, Marcus, they're much more likely to either trade for somebody who has a fraction of that salary, maybe a guy that's going to be in the $10-15 million per year new money range on an extension, or they would trade for a guy who is still on a rookie contract. And that makes it much more stomachable.
Yeah, and I think that's why people have been mentioning like Romeo Doubs, who played with with Rodgers in 2022 or Dontavian Wicks or somebody like that. Again, we fully anticipate that making some kind of move because they're not going to go into the year with just Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, and DK Metcalf. But we should talk, Tommy, about a former Aaron Rodgers teammate, Jaire Alexander, who was released on Monday morning or will be released later this afternoon. Why now for the Packers moving on from Jaire?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. You've already dealt with the injuries over the last 2 years, played 7 games each of the past 2 seasons. You hope that the injury stuff is behind him. I know that the contract is sizable, but you have a good cornerback when healthy. The Packers' depth at the position is pitiful right now. And I would worry that they just hurt their chances of competing in the playoffs this year unless they do something to counteract the loss of Jaire. Now, I know that he got a little bit of trouble with the team. He had the week 17 suspension for conduct detrimental to the team last year. Assuming this isn't like a George Pickens level situation, you can get past, let bygones be bygones here. He is your best option that you need in the secondary right now. And so I don't think it makes a lot of sense at this point in the offseason. If you were to get rid of Jaire, do it early in the offseason where you had options to replace him.
I think they were hoping that a trade would materialize. Like they've known for a while they're going to move on. The problem, you mentioned the problem with Jaire Alexander is he just doesn't play. He's played 34 total games over the last 4 years. He's averaging about 480 snaps a season. You just can't be paying that guy $17 million to not play for you. Like it's a lot of money tied up into a cornerback that not only doesn't play, but also you're worried about him not practicing. He's got some of the locker room stuff. It doesn't seem like he's been a great leader. I understand why the Packers wanted to move on. I think they were hoping something was going to happen to a trade, and now he's a free agent, and we'll see what his free agent market looks like. 28-year-old cornerbacks who were just a Pro Bowler a couple of years ago, those guys don't become available very often, but when they do, it's usually for a good reason. And Tommy, what's funny is this is one of the more loaded free agent cornerback classes that we've had in June in a long time. You've got obviously now Alexander, Stephon Gilmore, Rasul Douglas, Mike Hilton, Asante Samuel Jr., and Jalen Ramsey's still sitting out there. And we know that he's not going to be playing for the Dolphins this year. If you need a cornerback, it's not a bad market.
No, it's not. You talked about the 34 games played by Alexander last year. Ironically, Marcus, that is half of the total games the Packers have played over the last 4 years. And so you're paying him to play half the season. Now, counterpoint here, Alexander had a base salary of over $16 million. And so maybe you can save money there by not getting those game checks. I don't know. It's just it's a wonky situation for a team with playoff aspirations, a pretty young roster overall, hoping to take that next step forward. Alexander's still 28 years old. You assume that he's got quite a bit left in the tank if he can stay healthy, but it's like they have to do something else now, I think.
Yeah, well, it shows you how much Green Bay just didn't want Jaire Alexander on the roster. Sure. And typically these corners that start to get to their late 20s and early 30s that have had a bunch of lower body injuries, they don't age particularly well. And I think you already started to see that a little bit with Alexander over the last couple of years. And I think Green Bay just wanted to get out now before it gets any worse. We'll see. I think the talent's still there. How banged up is he really? Is he somebody that you go into a season knowing that you can't count on him to play more than 10, 12 games? NFL teams don't like to deal with guys that just miss this much time because it just really alters the game plan and how they build their roster. He'll get picked up. He'll sign somewhere, but don't expect it to be any longer than a 1-year deal.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's going to be a 1-year contract. I think it should be structured probably in the way that like Tyron Smith's contract was structured with the Jets. Like you can't trust this guy to stay on the field. And so I don't think anybody's going to be throwing tons of money his way if he goes out and plays 5 to 7 games for him next year, because that's kind of what we've seen from him over the last 4 seasons.
And I'm glad that you brought up the Tyron example, because that's a perfect example of a player who hit free agency last year and everybody's saying, hey, he's only 32 years old. He's played this many games over the last couple of years. Look how good his PFF grade is when he plays. And then Tyron Smith plays 6 games and the Jets ended up paying like $7.5 million for 6 games.
Mhm.
There's a reason why a lot of these guys are available this late in the offseason.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the underlying issue that the Packers had right there. And so they might be looking for a cornerback. Marcus, let's shift gears and talk about the Nick Chubb news recently. And so Chubb kind of sitting in free agency for a while, longtime running back of the Cleveland Browns, perennial Pro Bowler for 4 seasons there, had a terrific stretch for the first 5 years of his career, dealt with injuries. The Minkah Fitzpatrick hit early in the 2023 season, tried to make his way back. Didn't look like the same player. Now he's headed to the Houston Texans, barring that physical, right? Did he officially sign at this point?
I think it's going to happen later on Monday, but it'll happen.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So out of the AFC North and into the AFC South, does Nick Chubb have anything left in the tank? I know that last year he looked like a shade of his former self. Can he get back to form? We do know that, again, he's much older at this point, but back in Georgia, he got his knee buckled inside out, just as catastrophic of an injury that he had against Pittsburgh in 2023. Can he return to offer this team something now?
I hesitate to say no with Nick Chubb because of how big of a freak he is, and he's such an awesome player when he's healthy. But this is where even really good running backs start to decline, like age 29, age 30. He was in the 2018 draft. And he's had a lot of touches on his body since then. I did think at the end of the year, we saw him become a useful inside runner. And maybe that's all the Texans need is somebody to come give them 7-8 touches inside to spell Joe Mixon. But I think there's a better chance of him not making the final roster than becoming, the 1B to Joe Mixon's 1A. It's unfortunate because I do think when Nick Chubb was healthy, you can make a case that he was the best pure running back in the league. But those injuries have just zapped so much of his athleticism. We should also mention the Texans traded a 2026 third-round pick to go select Woody Marks in this year's draft. They have Dameon Pierce on the roster. Joe Mixon's still there. It's already kind of a crowded backfield. I don't think Nick Chubb is a lot to make this roster, but I'm hoping he does, and I'm hoping he gets back to at least some type of version that we saw in 2023 where he was a capable starter.
Yeah, and the Texans, they've had some of those reclamation prospects before, and Joe Mixon is the most recent. Now, Mixon didn't have the injury history that Chubb has. It is unfortunate to see this, but Marcus, it's we go back to this conversation all the time about running backs kind of being deplorable in a sense in terms of once they hit their prime or once they suffer a big injury like this, that's it. They're toast. That's all they wrote. At a different position, in the trenches, at quarterback, wide receiver, whatever, if you're 28, 29 years old, what was he, 27 when he had the injury? Like he was fairly young still.
Yeah, 27,
I could look it up.
yeah.
Right. So he was 2023 season. He was 28 years old. Most positions, you can come back from that and still have a pretty long and healthy career after that. Running backs, it's like you might not have anything left, and who's going to take the chance on you right now? And for the Browns' perspective, Marcus, it obviously never made sense, especially after the draft. You watch them take Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson to pair with who they got there?
Jerome Ford, who gives him some
athleticism,
gives him
something there.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was never coming back. But I would venture a guess that if he sticks around on the Texans roster, he is just going to be part of a committee and grab a few carries here and there. Like I just don't see anything left.
No, and it's really unfortunate. But again, maybe this is a good situation with a better quarterback. The offensive line is in rough shape though, so I don't think that's necessarily going to help.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Maybe being 2 years fully removed from that injury, maybe he's able to get back to being a average NFL running back, and I think that's all Houston is hoping for here.
All right, Marcus, let's talk about some of the trade buzz circulating around the NFL over the past week. And that's involving a pair of tight ends that I kind of threw out there a little prematurely here. But Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts, there have been teams calling, asking about trades. Reportedly, the Steelers have called about both of these guys here. Multiple teams have called about Kyle Pitts. It's not hard to see why. We want to start with one of these guys. Let's start with one.
Yeah, let's do Kyle Pitts. So it's not hard to understand where the trade talks are coming from. So Kyle Pitts, just to recap, first-round pick, top 5 pick, had one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen from a tight end and went over 1,000 yards, only the second tight end to ever do it back in 2021. And then he got hurt in 2022, and he's really never been the same since then. He's dealt with a bunch of lower body injuries. He's not, you watch him run compared to the way he did in 2021 or back when he was at Florida, and you can just see that he's a diminished athlete. But he's 24 years old. He's 6'6". He's 240 pounds. He's just not a great fit in the Zach Robinson offense where the tight ends have to do a lot of blocking. They're lined up tight, close to the tackles. He really needs to be used more as an oversized slot. But the Falcons already have an oversized slot in Drake London, and he's just a far better player right now. So I think the Falcons want to try to maybe change that tight end position up a little bit, maybe get some day 2 draft capital for Kyle Pitts. And that's why you've seen his name floated out there in trade talks.
Yeah, some people would talk about how bad Pitts has been over the past few years. I get all the struggles. I get that. High drop percentage, low success rate. All that stuff is fair and well, but we're talking about a guy who was really talented. And the fact that he had the rookie season that he did, Marcus, the Pro Bowl season, graded out as a top 5 tight end, 1,000-yard year, shows you that he's capable of that if he can return to form somewhat. And another thing that I looked at, Marcus, was the splits over the years. The more he plays as an inline Y tight end, the worse he is overall as a football player. You need to get this guy on the outside of the formation, or at the very least in the slot, a combination of the two. Could he be a glorified wide receiver? Could he be like what Dorial Green Beckham was supposed to be in the NFL? Just be a big receiver. Like, this is the guy that we saw at Florida. He's a receiver by trade, not a tight end, really, right?
No, you're right. It's just the problem is he just doesn't have the burst that he had during his rookie year. That knee injury really zapped him of all the athleticism. And you see in and out of his breaks, like, he's just not a sudden athlete at all anymore. So he's a 6'6", 240-pound slot receiver that doesn't create a lot of separation. And okay, that's okay. You can win with those guys, but it's not going to be, you're not getting the yards after the catch ability. You're not getting the guy that's going to create and separate away from defenders. You could build an offense around this guy, but I don't think Atlanta wants to. So it's going to have to be a very specific team. I just don't know what team that is yet.
Yeah. So, Marcus, let me ask you then, what do you think Kyle Pitts goes for in a trade, considering he's 24 and a half years old, should have a bright future ahead of him? Like we said, if he can return to form at all, would they be willing to part for him for an early day 3 pick, or is this going to take a day 2 selection?
Nope. I think a 4th round pick would do it. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Atlanta lets him go for less than that.
Okay. And so I would think that there would be at least a few teams out there chomping at the bit. We know too, Marcus, we know that teams get obsessed with a player's former draft status, right? If you're you're a top 5 selection in the NFL draft, especially if you had a Pro Bowl season early in your career, teams are going to like that, regardless of what we've seen the past few years from him. Some teams are going to be intrigued by that. And so I wonder if this would get into a bidding war at all. Personally, I mean, as a Steelers fan, I would gladly throw the 4th round pick his direction. The Steelers already have a couple tight ends, but it's like, why not take the chance with a reclamation project like this, as opposed to what you typically get out of a 4th round pick? I know he's going to need pay, but
that's the thing, is basically $11 million is what he's going to get paid from his new team. And I just don't think teams want to pay that much money to a guy that's had a hard time staying on the field, and he just looks clearly diminished. I'm one of the biggest Kyle Pitts fans there is. I'm hoping that it works out, but I wouldn't be surprised if the interest around the league just isn't there.
Okay. Good to know. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this next player too, is Jonnu Smith, Marcus, a guy that you've been openly fond of throughout his career. And he's coming off the best season of his career, 88 catches, 800 yards, 8 touchdowns. 8 seems to be the magic number here for Jonnu Smith. But the guy's 30 years old now. And so there's a counter argument either way. It's like, all right, Pitts is 6 years younger. He's the guy who has more size, has more speed to his game, at least did. We'll see what he's got left in the tank here. Jonnu Smith's a good athlete in his own right, but he's nearing the tail of his career here, or at least coming into his final few years. Didn't have a ton of size to work with. He's like 6'2", 6'3", 245 pounds. So more of like the H-back type size. Finally had a great season of production. Before this year, Marcus never had more than 50 catches in a season, was kind of just used as kind of like that H-back, kind of used all over the formation. Do you buy the season that Jonnu Smith just had with the Miami Dolphins? And let me ask you this. Why does Miami want to move on from him? I know that it's finances, right? You look ahead to the future, their financial state is in disarray. The only Pro Bowler on the Dolphins roster, when Mike McDaniel might be in the hot seat this year, does it make sense to execute a trade if you're the Dolphins?
No, but I don't think Miami wants to trade him. I think this is Jonnu Smith's agent, Drew Rosenhaus,
Okay.
trying to drum up some trade interest so he gets
Mhm.
this guy paid, right? I think Jonnu deserves a pretty big contract boost compared to what he's currently getting. And he's just trying to get the interest out there. He's using guys like Adam Schefter to hopefully drum up a trade market. I do think like Arthur Smith with the Steelers would love to have Jonnu Smith. Like he's openly talked about how
For
that's
sure.
been one of his favorite players to coach. I don't see Miami moving on from Jonnu. You look at that tight end depth chart, it's awful. They desperately need him, and he's a really good fit in that offense. So I don't expect Jonnu Smith to get traded. If he were to get traded, it probably wouldn't be for a ton because whatever team he's getting traded to is going to have to turn right around and pay a 30-year-old tight end probably $13-14 million a year, which is why I ultimately think he just stays in Miami with a new contract.
Yeah, and that's why as good as Jonnu was last year with the Dolphins, it's like I just don't think it makes enough sense for either team. Now, going back to Miami State here, Marcus, they have the 5th lowest amount of cap space in the NFL currently, according to Over the Cap. Next year, they're projected to be 10 million in the hole, the 7th worst cap situation entering the 2026 offseason. So maybe the finances does have something to do with it. It just seems like for a team like the Dolphins that continually can't get over the hump, why would you trade the one stable piece who was one of their best players last year? I don't see him getting moved, and I agree with you. I think that it's more of just a Rosenhaus play.
Yeah, no, we should also mention they're going to shed a bunch of salary here once they trade Jalen Ramsey. We'll see when that happens. I would expect it to get done sometime this summer. But you're right; they're not in a great situation financially. That's why the Tyreek Hill trade stuff has been rumored. That's why obviously the Jalen Ramsey stuff will be out there. We'll see if Bradley Chubb eventually gets traded or cut. Miami is in a tough spot right now, but I don't think they want to move on from someone like Jonnu Smith, who is a pretty good blocker, who can be moved all around the formation, can be used as a slot receiver. I do think that ultimately gets done.
Yeah, Marcus, NFL mini camps are starting up here soon. We still have a ways to go until training camps late July. But how many, like, if I were just throw an oddball number, like how many, like, somewhat high profile trades do you think are going to happen between now and then? And I know it's pretty obscure, but we've talked about guys like Jonnu Smith, Kyle Pitts, Jalen Ramsey, Tyreek Hill, is it DJ Moore? Like, how many of these you think get done if you're just to put a number of how many trades get done between now and
then?
I
think we'll get at least a couple. I think we're going to get at least one more big wide receiver move because there are a lot of teams out there that are searching for that wide receiver to help. And I also wouldn't be surprised if we get a big time cornerback move outside of just the Jalen Ramsey trade. That one will get done at some point, but I think we're going to see a lot of action. We've already seen this has been one of the most active trade markets in any NFL offseason we've ever seen. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a running back trade, whether that's maybe the Jets trading Breece Hall or the Seahawks trading Kenneth Walker. I expect the next 2 months to be pretty busy around the NFL.
All right. This was the No Huddle Show on Stacking the Box. We go live every Monday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Come join us next week. And thanks for again for listening to Stacking the Box.